Welcome to another edition of Papa's Perspective, brought to you by Bob's Discount Furniture, the official furniture store and a mattress partner of the New York Giants. The 100th season celebration continues, and we're bringing on various broadcasters, and we said, Super Bowl 42, Troy Aikman was behind the mic for Fox. Why not bring him on board to talk about it? Troy, thank you so much for a couple minutes, first and foremost.
You're welcome. Yeah, glad to be on, Bob. Thank you.
Yeah, so the Giants did their top 100 countdown, and a guy all too familiar, Lawrence Taylor, finished first in the voting. And it's been it's a special season for the Giants, and I don't think there's anything more special than Super Bowl 42. As you look back on it, having done the NFC Championship game and having done the game where the Giants played the Cowboys in the divisional round, did you get a sense going into this that they had more of a shot than most people thought?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they obviously had a lot of good things going for them. The way that they played through the postseason and into that Super Bowl. But New England, they had a lot going for them as well. But I don't know that a lot of people gave them much of a chance going into that ball game. But I think the fact that I had seen them throughout the regular season, but then also more importantly, once they got into the postseason and the role that they got on and the way that they were able to carry themselves, I thought they did have a shot, and it was a team they were familiar with based on the way that they finished the regular season as well. So I think there was some familiarity, but a lot of good things had to go their way in that game, and they did.
Obviously, they were able to get a lot of pressure on Brady, right? I mean, the Patriots are leading 7-3 through three quarters, and this is a team that had set every NFL scoring record. What was in your opinion, the key to their success of being able to hang with New England and sort of not allow New England to play the game they were accustomed to playing?
Yeah, I think that was the entire key, Bob. I mean, the fact that they go into that game, New England, with this high octane arsenal, and yet the Giants were able to keep the score down. And I feel like that was the key in giving them an opportunity to win that game. That there was no way that the Giants wanted to get into this shootout. And the defensive front for the Giants, they dominated the line of scrimmage. They continually harassed Brady throughout that game, and that's why they were where they were late in the game with an opportunity, within scoring distance to win it. But probably as people look back on that, it's a great point that you make, and even bringing it up, because people remember a lot of things about that game, but I don't know that stands out as much as some of the big plays, of course, that happened down the stretch.
Think about it, even late in the first half, Brady hits a couple of passes. They're driving. I think they're at plus 42 or whatever it was. And then, Brady gets sacked and he fumbles the football away. They were really good at taking away opportunities with the pressure on the quarterback. Tuck had a couple of sacks. Strahan gets a sack. Osi with the fumble recovery. That team, you played on some great teams, some powerhouse teams loaded with Hall of Famers. Conversely, you look at that Giants team, it was really a sum of the parts. When you think about the guys that wound up playing roles for them, obviously everyone remembers Tyree, but whether it's Ahmad Bradshaw stealing a ball away underneath a pile to keep a possession, Kevin Boss, a rookie tight end, with that big play to start the fourth quarter. It was an interesting team, the Giants, because it wasn't loaded with a lot of household names.
No, it wasn't. I mean, the you talk about Strahan and Tuck and guys like that. I mean, obviously they had great years, and Strahan's a Hall of Famer, and I'm sure Eli will be as well. I think there obviously were some really talented players, but I've always felt, and I think maybe it's a product of the way Tom Coughlin handled things as a head coach. I just feel that during his tenure, and that year in particular, that the Giants were, you say, the sum of their parts. I just feel like they were the consummate team, and teams are what wins championships, and the Giants proved that. And I think Tom Coughlin's teams, by and large, each and every year, really reflected what it meant to be part of a team. I think he preached that, I'm sure, each and every day. And those Giants players, I feel were very unselfish. I think back to the teams that I was a part of that won championships. They're unselfish teams. The Giants were unselfish during that year, and then put it together, and it paid huge dividends for them once they got into the biggest game of the season. But they represented that, and it was reflected, I think, throughout the season, and especially in the postseason. I look back on that run for them, and I would put that run and Eli's play during that postseason up against anyone's. I just thought it was really magical what they were able to do, and then to cap it off against a team like the Patriots, who were trying to make history of their own. It was quite an accomplishment and a tremendous way to end the year.
It's human nature when we're working an event. You're working the event, you're focused on the event as you're broadcasting it, but you also get caught up in it a little bit as it starts to unfold. At some point during this game, as you're looking at the scoreboard and you see it's 7-3 through 3, and then Tyree gets the touchdown catch to start the fourth, and suddenly the Giants are up 10-7. You're kind of sitting there saying to yourself, they may actually pull this thing.
No, you're right. I mean, I think the fact that it was close as late as it was, you start thinking, you're in the back of your mind, you're kind of waiting for things to kick in and for the Patriots to do what they had done throughout the year. And like you said, the Giants were opportunistic. They just didn't allow it to happen. And then as the game continued to roll on, and you start, Joe and I, we go to commercial break, and we're thinking, man, they just might do this. I mean, as crazy as that sounds, it looks like they might be able to pull this off, and then they were able to. So that was, we've called a few Super Bowls, and that one is the one that certainly stands out for me amongst all the ones that I've called.
We continue our celebration of 100 years of the New York Football Giants, and the Giants captured their first Super Bowl in the 1986 season. And who better to have on than the man who presented Wellington Mara the Super Bowl trophy for the first time? You are looking live. Brent Musburger of CBS and then later ABC joins us for this episode. Brent, thank you so much for a couple of minutes today.
It's a pleasure to go back and talk about some of the great moments in the history of the NFL. And that one was so big. I must tell you, Bob, I was disappointed in the performance of John Elway and the Broncos, but on the other hand, the Giants, that defense was unbelievable. And then your quarterback, Phil Simms, has the greatest day of his career. 3 touchdown passes, no interceptions, on target all day long. It was a great performance, and Simms so richly deserved the MVP award.
Brent, when you think about the NFL today on CBS, till this day, pregame shows are trying to find the magic that you had with your group. And the NFC, after so many dormant years in the 70s, became dominant in the 80s, and that was the conference that CBS covered. Between the Giants and Niners and Washington and all of those great teams, it was an electric time at CBS, wasn't it?
Oh, it really was. Hey, you overlooked, Bob, the Dallas Cowboys.
That's right, the Dallas Cowboys. But by the mid-'80s, they were starting to fade a little bit.
They were. But, of course, it was a giant, Coach Landry, who put the show on the road. When you look back and you think about the history of the Giants, and you're doing it, and I think about Vince Lombardi and Tom Landry coming from that coaching staff. And then they went on to have such great success with Green Bay and Dallas, what the Giants meant. And they were part of this revival in the 80s. You mentioned it. We were extremely fortunate. First of all, I had great people, Bob, working with me. Phyllis George, obviously Dallas Cowboys. Irv Cross, who had played and who I knew at Northwestern before he went to the National Football League. Then we added Jimmy the Greek, and it was just kind of a mixture of personalities that worked. But then along came the NFC revival. Okay, the Giants were part of it. Let's not overlook what the Chicago Bears were doing. When you take New York and Chicago, those two huge TV markets, and you have them winning football and people looking forward to their games on Sunday, it just meant so much more success for the NFL today. Okay, and the Rams, got to remember, out in Los Angeles, they were playing pretty well too. So I think we were lucky, as well as being good. but certainly the Giants, what Coach Parcells meant to that team. I told you when you called me on the phone about this, I said, you know, there's one anecdote that I've never spoken about that game out at the Rose Bowl. It was about, I don't know, maybe 5 hours before we were to go on the air. It was very early in the morning, LA time. And I was going through the two locker rooms to see where the stage would be set up for the presentation of the trophy. And when I went into the Giants locker room, it was completely empty except for one person. And sitting all alone on a player's bench in front of a locker, reading the program for the Super Bowl, was Coach Bill Parcells. And of course, we had covered him so much. I went over and asked him, Coach, anything I could do for you? A cup of coffee, water, or anything? No, Brent. He was so nice. He said, I can't sleep the night before games, he said, so I just had somebody take me out real early, getting ready for the game. And we talked about a lot of things, you know, about the whole year in general, his great defense. And he was so gracious, like a lot of coaches. You get him right before the game. And as Lombardi used to say, the hay's in the barn. And so there's nothing more with preparation. And they're quite willing to sit there and tell you about what they think is going to happen. And that's when Bill said he thought that his defense could handle John Elway in that game, and handle him. They did. They had a safety in that game. And it was just a great, great performance.
Yeah. And earlier in that season, in what was being dubbed as a Super Bowl potential preview, the Giants beat the Broncos at Giants Stadium. Then there was the NFC Championship game, 17-0 over Washington, and the wind is blowing, and now you're in Pasadena, and you know you've got the dulcet tones of Summerall and Madden, who really were like a symphony for football at that point in time. You had the perfect recipe at CBS.
Yeah, we really did. You know, John and Pat made such a great team. It was interesting, Bob. I haven't told many people this, but internally, we actually had a vote as to who John Madden was going to work with. His first year, he was very fortunate to have worked with Gary Bender, who was a very generous play-by-play announcer and really taught John Madden the ins and outs of broadcasting and the monitors and the replays and everything. But remember, we also had Vince Scully as one of our play-by-play guys.
Right.
So
people forget he was on the call of the catch.
Yes.
Dwight Clark. It was Vince Scully who did that game.
It was his last game with us, Bob. And I've always thought Vinny was a good friend, but he kept a lot of things to himself. I've always thought when we didn't put Madden with him and chose Summerall instead, that Vince said, that's it. I'm leaving, you know. And so he went on his way. And of course, one of the greatest, if not the greatest baseball announcer of all time. But the reason why it worked better with Summerall, honestly, is that John Madden could have more airtime to make it as simple as possible. Vinny, very elaborate, very great with details. But Pat was much more succinct. And so John had more room during the broadcast, and it showed in that Super Bowl and that dominant win by the Giants over the Broncos.
The celebration of 100 seasons continues for the New York Giants. And, you know, as we're doing during the course of the season, we're looking back at some great moments in Giants history with various broadcasters that called some of the games. And we're joined by ESPN's Joe Buck, who spent so many years at Fox and doing all those NFC Championship games. And Joe, first of all, thank you for joining us here on the show.
Oh, absolutely. I need Bob's discount furniture right now. I'm in a hotel room. The video looks terrible. Maybe they could give me a lamp to go on the other side of my face so I don't look like I'm in a floodlight right here to my left. But all that being said, it's great to see you. I can tell you've been either at camp or you have been doing the golf tour, because you look radiant. Your skin color is absolutely gorgeous. I'm pale as could be, and it's summer.
No makeup is necessary when you work.
No, I mean, you're glowing. You're glowing.
You know that. Joe, I want to take you to a time when there was not a lot of sun out, because you were on the call for the 2007 NFC Championship game at Lambeau Field. The Giants against the Packers. We knew it was going to be cold, but when you finally got to the stadium, could you believe how cold it actually was?
It's a great question. No, yeah, you can't describe it, and you don't want to be the one. You never want to be the one complaining about the weather, but it was part of the story. And I remember when I was going to Louisville to begin my broadcasting career, and I was in the car with my dad, and he said, "I want to tell you a couple things." One of the things was nobody cares if the announcer's cold, nobody cares if the announcer's hot, nobody cares if the announcer played golf that day. The fans are there to listen to the game, and they want to hear about their team. And in this case, you have a massive audience on this freezing day in Green Bay. The irony of it was my dad did the Ice Bowl, and he did it with Ray Scott. And so when you go back and you look at the highlights, and Ray Scott's like, "Well, what do you think, Jack?" And my dad's like, "Oh, I think it's cold, Ray." And so there he is breaking his own rule. And so you didn't want to complain about the cold as the announcer, but you're right. I mean, going down to the field, I remember standing up there with Troy, and he and I going, "We got to go down to the field because you got to just see what the footing's like, and you got to get a sense of if, it's that much colder down on the field." We went down there. It was like the Griswolds at the Grand Canyon. We went down on the field and was like, okay, let's go back up. It was freezing. And I had never experienced cold like that. As you know, your fingers don't really work right. You're trying to write with a pen and the ink's not coming out. It was a great night for football. I'm glad I can say I was there.
Yeah, and you think about, the offensive linemen usually come out in short sleeves and the whole macho thing. And I know the Giants players came out for their normal kind of in shorts, running around, loosening up. Most of the guys went right back in. They're like, the heck with this. Like, this is brutal. This is not the time to act like the tough guy.
No, but I do think, if my memory is right, Plexico came out with at least short sleeves pre-game when we were down there. And I just remember looking at Troy, and Troy was like, "My God, I don't know how anybody could be standing down here with short sleeves on." But, they're running around and the juices are flowing and what have you. But it's a night I'll never forget. And it was an incredible game, and worthy of kind of the aura and mystique of Lambeau Field on a, negative temperature night.
It's interesting because going into the game, Eli obviously having played his college ball at Ole Miss, and although Favre was from Mississippi, having played in so many important games in that cold weather, everyone thought that it might favor Favre. And Eli Manning had one of his greatest games ever. 251 yards. Plaxico had 11 catches for $151. They were kind of throwing it around as if it wasn't minus 23 below.
I agree. It was stunning. It was stunning to watch. I felt like, just on the first glance, Green Bay was more affected by the cold than Favre was than the Giants were and Eli was. So, yeah, it was a remarkable game in what was basically a perfect postseason for Eli Manning. I mean, I think it's easy to forget, the 2004 draft, and then, the taking over for Kurt Warner and everything that happened in the beginning of his career. But now he went to a different level in that postseason. I mean, you know it better than I, the stats better than I, but I just remember seeing kind of fits and starts of his early part of his career. And then that postseason, he just hit it and went to a different Eli than I think any of us had ever seen.
Did you get a sense the Packers were the number one seed, the Giants or the number two seed, or the number one seed? Yeah, the Giants had beaten the Cowboys the week before in Dallas. But when Brandon Jacobs knocks the logo off of Charles Woodson's helmet, did you kind of get a sense in the booth that, man, these guys came to play and are not intimidated at all, despite the fact that the Packers had routed them earlier that season in MetLife Stadium, or Giant Stadium at the time?
I think that delivered a message. I do. I think that was symbolic of the way that team came in there, that Giants team came in there ready to go. And I think that reflects on Tom Coughlin. I think history, at least for Troy and me, and I know, I think you did this with Troy, but he would tell you that of all the guys that you would think would be tight-lipped when we would sit down with a head coach prior to a game and not reveal anything, Belichick absolutely didn't say anything. Tom Coughlin was great and gave you everything you needed to know. I think trusted us probably because of Troy and his integrity, but he was wide open. And I felt like I walked out of our meeting with Tom knowing that Tom thought his team was ready to go. And to me, if that's the case, then I thought they would play well. I didn't know that they would be ready for that kind of a fist fight in that kind of cold. I think it says everything you need to know. And probably as we talk about it this way, thinking about what was to come in the Super Bowl, it shouldn't have been so surprising. And they probably shouldn't have been such a big underdog going into that Super Bowl for having gone through Green Bay. That team had to feel like behind closed doors, they were a team of destiny.
As we continue celebrating 100 seasons of Giants football, who better to have on than the man who is arguably the greatest NFL play-by-play man on TV, Al Michaels, who called Super Bowl 25 as well as Super Bowl 46. We're going to focus on 25 a little bit. Al, thanks for a couple minutes for joining us here on this celebration of 100 seasons.
My pleasure, Bob, because, a lot of fan bases aren't too excited with me. Certainly the Buffalo Bills fan base, no good, wide right. But with the Giants, I'm 2-0. Perfect.
Well, let's go back to Super Bowl 25 because, maybe we've become a little bit desensitized by world conflict, but, the United States was in a world conflict and just getting into that Tampa stadium and the security around the stadium, it was kind of a surreal experience and something that we weren't really accustomed to.
Bob, first time I can remember driving up to a stadium and you had concrete barriers surrounding the stadium. So you had security of on a different level at that particular point. One of the things that we weren't able to do at ABC is fly a blimp or a helicopter above the stadium for the aerial shots. So what we had to do is, I think they found a hotel about a half mile away with a great lens and put it up on the roof and shot Tampa Stadium from that angle. And that was that. And then the night before the game, Dennis Swanson, who was the president of ABC Sports, called Dan Dierdorf and Frank Gifford, with whom I called the game, into a meeting with a local SWAT team. And they came into the meeting and told us what we should do if we were held hostage in the booth. Now, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, really? The terrorists are going to come into the broadcast booth and kidnap us and hold us hostage. And they made it seem very scary. And I walked out of the meeting and I looked at, Dan Dierdorf was looking at me and he goes, wow, this is really something. And I walked out with Frank alone and I said, Frank, you do know what this is. A bunch of guys want to get into the game for free with a good vantage point. And Frank said 100%. So that's so many of my memories of that game, Bob, deal with, the things that took place around the game. And it was also, if you recall, it was a murky, cloudy day. I don't think the sun ever came out that day. And it kind of befit the mood of the country at that point, because we had invaded Iraq, trying to, free up Kuwait, whom Iraq had invaded. So we were only about 10 or 12 days into this war. CNN had blanket coverage, all of the networks. And here, in fact, our pregame show, our halftime show, in fact, we didn't cover the entertainment. We wound up going to Peter Jennings in New York for a 30-minute report or whatever length of time it was. But one of my other memories about this game, so many, as I said, before the game, around the game. So, of course, Phil Simms had gotten hurt late in the season. Jeff Hostetler had taken over as the quarterback, would lead the Giants to the promised land. And I'm down on the field about 2 hours before the game, just walking around, talking to some of the guys. And I'm talking to Simms. And Phil is standing there on the sideline. And then Parcells walked by. And Bill acknowledged me. How are you? didn't acknowledge Sims at all. And I looked at Phil and I said, nice. And Phil said, if you're not playing, you might as well be dead. And as I say, the sidebar stories to that game will live forever with me.
Al, because you were calling Monday Night Football during that stretch, obviously the Giants had a really strong football team, so you had a familiarity with Parcells and with this team. This matchup with this K-Gun offense and the Bills having scored 1 billion points in the AFC Championship game, did you think that the Giants had a legitimate shot to win going into the game?
Well, the Bills beat a team in the Oakland Raiders at that point, of the Los Angeles Raiders, I think 51-3. So I kind of threw that off to the side, not necessarily indicative of the strength versus the Giants in this particular game. But I will tell you this. So on, I think, Wednesday or Thursday before the game, it's time for our production meeting with Bill Parcells. And I got along for the most part great with Bill, but Bill wanted us to be in his office at 6:30 in the morning at the facility. And that's the only time he could meet with us. So nothing like getting up, with my West Coast body at, whatever it was, 5:45, go down there. And the one thing that Bill emphasized over and over and over was to control the ball, win the time of possession. Clearly, that was the MO. And clearly, that was probably the most important factor in that game, because the Giants controlled the ball for over 40 minutes, which left Kelly and company and Thurman Thomas and Andre Reed with less than 20 minutes of possession time. So when you look at it at the end of the day, that's exactly what Bill said. He emphasized it over and over in that meeting, and that's what happened.
It's interesting. They go on that drive at the end of the half. Stephen Baker catches the touchdown. Giants get the ball to start the third quarter, and they go on this epic drive in the third quarter. And people forget that Mark Ingram's play turns out to be a huge factor, because the Giants wind up chewing off more clock in that drive in the third quarter and eventually score a touchdown. If he doesn't convert that third down play, it's a field goal, and there's a lot more time on the clock for Buffalo in the game. It's one of these great effort plays that kind of signified what a Parcells team was all about.
I remember that play very vividly. I also remember this is in the day before technologically we could do the first down line. So you didn't know if he could. So I'm looking at it and I'm calling it, and I can see the stick on the other side. And I said, he's got it, and then it's one of those moments where you go, oh, if they move the ball back a couple of inches, I've blown that call. But I remember that play perfectly. He reached out, got it by whatever it was, a couple of inches. And you're right. That sustained what turned out to be, I think, about a 9.5 minute drive.
Yeah. A drive for the ages. Now, Buffalo finally decides at some point in this game to start running it, because at points in the game, the Giants had one down defensive lineman. And then I think it was Everson Walls makes the tackle on Thurman Thomas that forced the field goal of Norwood's to be the length that it was. But, that whole game, and it felt like it was margins of inches that decided a lot of things.
No question. So now, you're setting up the Norwood field goal attempt. Grass field, 47 yards. The air's a little heavier than it might normally be on a sunny day. And the great Steve Hurt, who was our top research man and still works with me on Thursday Night Football to this day, Steve put up a graphic, Norwood lifetime, 145 from 40 plus on grass fields. Had the distance, but not the accuracy. Oh, yeah. And of course, when I'm calling that play, I'm not going to embellish it. I mean, it's a real simple call. No good, wide right, period. Let it go. Let the pictures tell the story. And of course, they want to kill me in Buffalo every time they see me. I didn't kick it. What can I tell you?